Good morning and welcome, everyone. This is the panel called Nukes Forever, the administration's new nuclear war plan, panel number 2005. My name is Tess Rose, and I'm a student here at CU. I'm a senior studying international affairs, French and Spanish. And joining us is Joe Cirincione. I'm a very big fan. Joe is the president of the Plowshares Fund, which is a global security foundation focused on eliminating nuclear weapons. And additionally, he worked on the Hill in Washington as a committee staffer in the U.S. House of Representatives as the director of nuclear policy programs and as the director of nuclear policy programs at the Stimson Center and the Carnegie Endowment. Additionally, he served as vice president for national security at the Center for American Progress. He's one of the leading experts in this field. A fun fact about him is 2 months ago, in the fall, he was featured on The President's Show, which is on Comedy Central, and he spoke with the president. You can all find that on YouTube. It's really great. So we're going to start out by learning about the global context of nuclear weapons today. So can you tell us about where we are with nuclear weapons?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Tess. Thank you very much. And thank you all for getting up so early and coming here to listen to this depressing topic. The new nuclear war plan, as if we don't have enough problems. We're going to talk about the possibility of nuclear war. Thank you, Tess. Let's set the global context. What's happening in the world right now? First, if you don't mind, there's some good news to talk about on nuclear weapons before we get to the threats. And I always believe that if you're going to do an analysis, you have to be honest about it. You have to lay out all the factors. You can't just pick and choose the ones that suit your preference. So I think that we're in a serious situation, but there's good news. We've made enormous progress over the last several decades in reducing the number of nuclear weapons in the world. We used to have 34,000 nuclear weapons. We're down to about 4,000 in our active arsenal. Fun fact, 48 of them are here in Colorado, stationed at part of the missile base that straddles the border up in northeast Colorado. We're down to about 4,000 from 34,000. Globally, there used to be 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world. We're down to about 15. There used to be dozens of countries who wanted these kinds of programs in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We're down to 9 nuclear weapon states. Only 9 countries have them, including North Korea. There's really no other country on the horizon. We have a successful deal with Iran that it slashed that country's program. Remember, I've been coming here for over 10 years, and one of the constant worries was Iran. We are not really worried about an Iranian bomb right now. We solved that problem 2 years ago with the program that slashed, with an agreement that slashed the program, froze it, and locked it up under one of the most intrusive inspection regimes we've ever seen. The Nobel Peace Prize last year went to a group that's called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, a group of regular people. At Plowshares Fund, we funded them. We gave them a grant, but we never thought they were actually going to succeed. They were one of the interesting groups we fund, and it turns out they helped convince 122 nations last year to sign a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. We've never had such a treaty. We have treaties banning chemical, we have treaties banning biological, but we've never banned nuclear weapons. Well, 122 nations agreed to do that. Now they're in the process of getting those respective parliaments to ratify it. I was at Oslo in December to see the award of the Peace Prize. It was inspiring. 10,000 people in the audience to hear John Legend and other musical stars perform, cheering the abolishment of nuclear weapons. It was very, very encouraging. So there's a lot of good things going on in the world, but they're contending with some of the dire trends. And the most dire trend is that we are back in a nuclear arms race. Every single nuclear-armed state is building new nuclear weapons. Some of them are expanding their arsenals, like India and Pakistan and China. They have relatively small arsenals, 120 or so weapons for India and Pakistan, maybe 250 for China, but they're building more weapons and they're expanding their arsenals. Others are just replacing older weapons, weapons that are wearing out after 30, 40 years of service, like the United States, like Russia, United Kingdom, and France. But every single one of these countries is building new nuclear weapons. So you have to be worried about that. And that, for me, when I rank the threats, that's like the 5th most serious threat in the world is this new nuclear arms race that's now underway.
Speaking of countries that are now developing nuclear weapons, can you tell us what we know about North Korea and the potential threat?
Yes, I can. I can do. I would put. Okay, we're going to talk about North Korea, and that is my 2nd most dangerous threat in the world, is North Korea. So this is a country, they started their program, well, actually in the 60s, with getting a nuclear reactor, a research reactor from Russia, part of the exchanges that were going on all over the world, the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The trouble is the kind of reactor they got and that some other countries got can also be used to make plutonium, which can be used for a bomb. So they were edging up since 60, 70, 86. They really expanded this reactor. We really started to worry about them. There were various agreements with them over the years that froze their program, that prevented the program from advancing. But those collapsed in the George W. Bush administration, thanks, honestly, to John Bolton, who torpedoed the agreement that we had, something called the Agreed Framework, that had frozen their program so they weren't making any more plutonium for weapons. John Bolton hated that agreement. When he found out that North Korea was cheating on the agreement, which they were, they had a little side project to make uranium, he said he used that as the hammer he'd been looking for to kill the agreement. John Bolton doesn't believe in arms control agreements. He doesn't believe in reaching agreements with evil states, rogue states. We can talk about that a little more if you want. But we killed that agreement. What that meant was that North Korea then said, okay, let's go. And they detonated a nuclear bomb in 2006. And they've been proceeding steadily ever since. We just have coming out of 2017 where they did more missile tests in 1 year than they had done in pretty much the whole rest of their existence. And they tested some very capable missiles. This is real. We're not making this up. You don't have to exaggerate the North Korean threat. It is a very serious threat. They tested twice an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach any part of the United States. It could hit Seattle, it could hit Denver, it could hit Mar-a-Lago. It's got quite a range. They know what they're doing. This is a very serious program. It surprised a lot of us. It surprised even the intelligence estimates that they were moving as fast as they were. And they also detonated their 6th nuclear test, and this one was a hydrogen bomb. So atomic bombs are the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those are small bombs by today's standard. The United States, Russia, Great Britain, most of the countries that have nuclear weapons use hydrogen bombs, so-called two-stage weapons, where the atomic bomb is used to generate the heat and the pressure and the radiation to fuse hydrogen fuel, to fuse hydrogen atoms together. This is the energy that powers the sun and all stars, fusion. And if you can do that, and we can, you could release an enormous amount of energy, and your bombs then become 10, 20, 50 times more powerful than atomic bombs. So they set off a hydrogen bomb test last year we measured at about 150 kilotons, 150,000 tons of explosive force. That's 10 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. So this is serious. They have a serious program. Can they hit the United States with the hydrogen bomb? Probably. Probably, but not certainly. They've got the missile, they've got the bomb, they probably are able to miniaturize the bomb and fit it on the nose cone of a missile. What we don't know, and what they don't know, is the biggest uncertainty is they can put it up. Can they get it back down? Does the nose cone, does the reentry vehicle survive the stresses and temperature and vibrations of reentry? This is an extremely demanding mission. We haven't seen them successfully test a reentry vehicle. It's within their technical capabilities, so the intelligence assessment officially is that they probably can do this, but they certainly will be able to do it within about a year or 18 months. So this is a very real threat to the United States. It's the only new nuclear threat, and fortunately the only one on the horizon. There's we often say countries like Iran and North Korea, but there are no countries like Iran and North Korea. There's only Iran and North Korea. There are no other nations chomping at the bit with a nuclear program ready to cross the nuclear threshold. So if we can resolve North Korea, we might say that we're able to resolve the proliferation problem, resolve the spread of these weapons, to stop it finally from this trend that began with Hiroshima. If you can solve North Korea, you might have an historic turning point in nuclear weapons. So that's why the stakes are so high if Donald Trump actually does meet with Kim Jong-un, as they're planning to do in a couple of months.
If North Korea were to launch a missile at the United States, could we protect ourselves?
No. So, we have a missile defense system. We've been working on missile defenses since the Nazis launched V2s. I mean, seriously, since the first ballistic missile, people have been trying to stop it. You may remember the Nazis first attacked Great Britain with what they called V1s, cruise missiles. First cruise missile. And the Air Force, the Royal Air Force, would send up planes and shoot them down because they're fast, but they weren't that fast. And then they got the V2, a ballistic missile. So a ballistic missile is a weapon that has a short period of powered flight, and then it follows a ballistic trajectory, like a baseball thrown from the outfield that is heading towards home plate. You know, if the guy's good, it hits home plate. If they're off a little bit, it misses. But that trajectory is what goes on. Powered flight, then you coast through space. And that was the V2, and this came in real fast, really hard to stop. We've been trying to develop systems to shoot these things down ever since then. We currently have a program called the Ballistic Missile Defense Agency. It's a whole agency. It just got a major boost in funding. We've been spending about $10 billion a year on this program. It got a boost to $13 billion in the president's new budget. We have 44 interceptors placed up in Alaska. So these are ballistic missiles, but defensive ones, that aim to hit this missile right about mid-course, right as it's coasting. Because once you track it, and we can track a ballistic missile about 1 or 2 minutes after launch, it breaks cloud cover, we can get a bead on it, we have satellites that can detect it, and you get 1 point, 2 points, bang, that's it. Now you can detect its trajectory, where it's going, how fast it's going, so you can predict its whole flight path. So if you can do that, and we can do that, then you can pick out a point where you can try to intercept that missile, and you send up your missile to basically hit it. So you're hitting a missile with a missile, and this is so hard, they say it's the equivalent of hitting a bullet with a bullet. It's extraordinarily hard to do, and we can do it. We can do it. We can actually do this thing about half the time. And this is where this gets tricky. So, you know, the Ballistic Missile Defense Agency always promotes its successful tests. This is great. They don't tell you that much about the ones that miss. So we've done about 18 tests of this system. 10 times it's intercepted, which is an astonishing feat. But the other 9 times, or 8 times, it missed. 19 tests, 10 intercepts. And the problem gets worse because these tests are more like demonstrations. They're testing for success. They reduce all the variables so that it's extremely hard. They don't do anything that would compromise their ability to hit the target. So we know where the target's coming from. We know what its velocity is. We know what it looks like. So the radars and other sensors that are in the interceptor know what they're looking for. So when these few dots show up on their digital screen, they know that's the warhead. And they try to do a direct hit of it. The problem is that's not the way it is in the real world. So you understand that. You're testing to see, can you do this at all? And so we can, about half the time. But in the real world, the North Koreans are not going to cooperate with us. The North Koreans are not going to put up a missile at the time we expect. For example, all our tests have been during the day. The North Koreans' last 2 missile tests were at night. What does that mean? There's a little debate about this, but that means that the target's dark. It's not being lit by the sun, so it's a little harder to see. The temperature's a little different. The North Koreans almost certainly would accompany their warhead with decoys. So lightweight balloons that look exactly like the decoy to the sensors. There'll be 6 little pixels over here that indicates the target, but there'll be another 6 little pixels here and here and here and here. And the sensors cannot tell which is the real warhead. Plus, they can put out chaff, little pieces of wire that can just make the whole thing look like a cloud to the radar. They can put little tiny jammers, 5-watt jammers that can blind the infrared jammers, the radar jammers. Sensors, rather. So there's all kinds of tricks that they can do. How do we know they can do that? Because we did it. Some of you may remember the Polaris missile, the first submarine-launched ballistic missile. I was just having an exchange with a colleague. Our Polaris missile, the very first one, 1960, it had 3 warheads, decoys, and chaff in it to overcome the relatively primitive missile defenses that the Soviets were then deploying. So our chances of hitting a North Korean missile, I would say they're close to 0. They're close to 0, unless North Korea cooperates. So the success of the missile defense depends on the enemy cooperating with you. And if they are determined to overcome this defense, there's not a chance in hell you can actually hit that thing.
Speaking of cooperation, we know that Trump has stated that he's going to meet with North Korea. Do you think they can successfully navigate a diplomatic solution?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. So I am not as pessimistic as some people are about this. Again, let's just lay out the possibilities. I'm completely out of the prediction business. I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win in a landslide. So clearly, I don't know anything. So you really got to be very modest about our ability. As Yogi Berra said, it's tough to predict the future. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So, I don't know, Yogi Berra is very useful in dealing with Trump. You got to bend your mind a little bit. So, there's 3 possibilities. One is that the summit doesn't happen at all. The Trump administration exists in a state of quantum uncertainty. You just don't know what's going to happen day to day. Does anybody know what's going to happen today in the Trump administration? Did any of us predict yesterday? Right? What's he going to do on Syria? So there's a whole lot of uncertainty. He just canceled his trip to Latin America today. He was supposed to go on a tour of Latin America. He says, no, I'm not going to go. I'm going to manage the crisis with Syria. Could he cancel his summit with Kim? Well, it's not even actually formally set yet. Again, quantum uncertainty. But yesterday, we had Donald Trump say he was looking forward to meeting with Kim Jong-un. That's the dictator of North Korea, the third in line. His father and grandfather were both the rulers of North Korea. He says he's looking forward to doing it in late May or June. Okay, so now we got some boundaries here, a little less uncertainty. Now we have a probability wave, someplace in May, someplace in June. Kim Jong-un, the North Korean press service, issued their first formal comment on this just yesterday, talking about the prospects of beginning a dialogue, that's the way they put it, a dialogue with the United States on denuclearization. So we get an acknowledgement from Kim, we have an acknowledgement from Trump, so it's possible it will happen, but we don't know. They could pull it either one of them could kill it at the last minute. I think it's probably going to happen. The second possibility is that it happens and it's a disaster. And a lot of people are worried about this. And it revolves around what the definition of denuclearization is. And Trump thinks that Kim committing to denuclearization, which they did in the invitation to Trump last month, March. I was up visiting my daughter in California, in Eureka, and this news breaks, and I do a phone-in interview with Chris Matthews on his show Hardball, and we're watching in real time the South Korean officials come out to the driveway of the White House, and they make the announcement that Kim Jong-un has invited the President of the United States, and North Korean leaders have invited presidents for years. They've been trying to get such a meeting, but astonishingly, Trump accepted much to the surprise of all of his advisors and the South Korean officials. And so they say this, and Matthews goes, well, Joe, what does this mean? And go, I don't know. What? Did he just say that Trump is meeting with Kim Jong-un? So this is an historic meeting. But Trump thinks that the breakthrough is that Kim Jong-un has said he wants to talk about denuclearization. And for Trump, that means Kim's going to give up his weapons. That's not what it means for Kim Jong-un. For Kim Jong-un, this is the beginning of a process where he's willing to talk about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, something that's been an official Korean statement since the 1990s. And he means that the U.S. doesn't have any nuclear weapons there. We used to have 1,000 nuclear weapons in South Korea. We took them out bit by bit. In 1991, George H.W. Bush took the last couple of hundred out. But he means that they won't be stationed anywhere near Korea. He means that the U.S. will sign a peace treaty with North Korea, ending the Korean War, which never officially ended. We're only in an armistice. He means that the United States and South Korea will end their military alliance, because Kim Jong-un sees that as a nuclear alliance. And he's right. We are committed to using nuclear weapons to defend South Korea. And he's saying, no, 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 denuclearization. Nobody uses nuclear weapons. So that's what Kim means. So what happens when Trump goes to the summit and he finds that out? And that he's not going to come back with North Korea's weapons in the plane. This is not going to happen. So what happens? Well, you know, he could get very angry. This is a man that has what his own advisors call fits of anger. He had one yesterday, apparently. And this could then put us back on the path to war. You remember last year at this time, there was most of the world was afraid that we were going to go to war with North Korea. Remember, they had just tested a new missile. They were having a rapid series of tests, and Trump said he was sending an armada. Turns out, no, there was no armada. It didn't really exist, but he thought there was, and he thought he was sending it. And you know, I was doing interviews at the time, and people thought we were going to go to war with North Korea. Well, we could go back on that track again. That's the second possibility. The third possibility is this could actually work. This is actually work. And for those of us who are very critical of lots of things about the Trump administration, we have to admit the possibility that he could be onto something. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, the bluster, the threats, the demands has created some negotiating leverage, has scared people enough, including China, to be able to back a negotiating process that could work in some way, not the way he thought, a complete deal, I'm going to pick up the weapons and go, but a process. And by the time they get to the summit, Trump and Kim could have so much vested in the success of the summit, and this is very common. There's this summit syndrome where the leaders want it to succeed. They have to go away showing they're victorious, that there could be a process that started. Kim could say some nice things. Trump could say some nice things. There could be an agreement to work out a process of denuclearization. There could be an exchange of, we could decide to open up an interest section in Pyongyang, for example, like we had in Cuba for many years, not an embassy, but we could make some steps. They could make some steps. They could declare it a success, and Trump could go away with a major foreign policy success, maybe at a time when he really, really needs to have a success. So this could actually work, and that would be, however fraught that path would be for negotiations, it is infinitely preferable to the path we were on a year ago. It's much better to be working on a possible peace process than on a certain let's go to war process.
I think many of us wonder if Trump will ever launch a nuclear weapon and if he really does have the sole capacity to make that choice.
Yes, he does have the sole authority. At the end of last year, I did an article for an online journal called Defense One, which is aimed at the defense community. And I did my annual assessment of the 5 top nuclear threats. And the good news is nuclear terrorism dropped off that list. I had a panel yesterday talking about why I think the risk of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or another group using a nuclear weapon has dropped. But what I was afraid of was the arms race. The people are developing new uses of nuclear weapons. They're starting to talk again about tactical battlefield uses for nuclear weapons. We are, the Russians are, Pakistan is. There's the possibility that the Iran deal could collapse. I think we have a whole panel on the Iran deal later in this conference. There's the risk of North Korea. But the number one threat I felt, and this is the first time I did it, I think the number one threat to the United States, the number one threat to the United States is the United States. It is the President of the United States because of his temperament, his instability, his volatility, and his unfettered ability to launch a nuclear weapon anytime he wants, and because the policies he's been championing up until this point make the prospect of a North Korean war more likely, make the possibility of the collapse of the Iran deal more likely, make the arms race more likely. Every other threat we face is made worse by the policies of this administration, and you have this unique problem of this president with this power. So every president has this power. We designed a system of civilian control over the military. That's one of the things that makes us a democracy, and that includes nuclear weapons. The military doesn't get to decide, at least theoretically, when to use a nuclear weapon. Eisenhower started this process. I don't want some damn colonel getting us into a nuclear war, he said, because we had thousands of battlefield nuclear weapons under the control of colonels, sometimes captains. No. And you started to centralize this. And under Kennedy, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he got so concerned about who actually makes the decision that they formalized this process. And there's only one man, and so far it's always been a man, and it's only the president. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the President of the United States is followed by a military officer who carries this very big football, this briefcase we call the football. Black leather briefcase. You've seen it in various shots occasionally. At any time and for any reason, the president could bring that officer over, have him open up the briefcase, have him pull out the briefing books, and there he has options for launching nuclear weapons. 1, a dozen, 100, 1,000. And in his pocket, or sometimes, if I was Trump, I'd probably have the officer carry it, is a little card, a verification card. They call it the biscuit. That's the verification code. So this officer, at Trump's order, would bring on the phone the military command authority. This is our operations center, usually a brigadier general in charge. And he would give the order that he would choose. And then he would be challenged. He would be getting a challenge code, Bravo Delta Charlie, and he would read off his verification code, and that's it. That's it. He doesn't have to consult with anybody. He doesn't have to bring in the Secretary of Defense. He doesn't have to bring in the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Would they be brought in the call? It's possible. He could decide he wants a conference call, but he doesn't have to. It's up to him who he wants to bring on. It's that brigadier general that's the only point in the nuclear chain of command. The brigadier general then calls the head of the strategic command, which is where the control of all our missiles and bombers and subs, and relays the order to him. And the way this works is the military has to execute that order. They don't say, no, sir, I don't think this is a good idea, or have you thought? They could raise a question, but the president's order is the president's order. There's no way short of a mutiny for the military to refuse to carry out that order, and that's what scares people. Now, let me just be honest with you. If today Donald Trump did that out of the blue and said he wants to bomb North Korea, there would be a lot of pushback. I mean, the military is obligated to do that. They're legally obligated to carry out a legal order from the president, but there would be a lot of pushback. And I think there's a pretty good chance that some of the military, maybe those two generals, maybe others, would say, no, this is whack. We are not going to do this. But that is probably not the situation we're going to face with an order out of the blue, a truly, clearly crazy order. Imagine we're in a period of tension. Imagine the North Korean talks fail. Imagine the president does pull out of the Iran agreement in May and things escalate in Iran. I mean, things are bubbling over in the Middle East. You know, the Israelis just attacked a base in Syria 2 days ago with Iranians in it. They killed 14 people. I haven't heard if any of those are Iranians yet. Suppose there's a crisis in the Middle East and things are boiling over, or a crisis in Northeast Asia, and then you get the call to send 12 nuclear weapons, zeroing in on this set of targets. And it's all been vetted. It's all legal. It's all a pre-planned option that the president has. Would the military refuse? Well, I'll tell you what the military officers have said. We're trained to carry out our orders. We're trained to carry out our orders. And so this is a uniquely dangerous situation. In some ways, I don't know how to politely put this, but the volatility of this particular president has exposed some of the insanity of the system that we have. We developed this system for good reason, for sound reason, but it is insane to give one person the ability to destroy in 30 minutes all that humanity has constructed over the millennia. We have enough authority in our arsenal to wipe out everything, to wipe out human civilization. And one person could do that. Who would create such a system? Why would we do that? How bad could the situation be to have that kind of threat to resolve the crisis? So a lot of people are talking about this and saying, let's rethink this. And so you have bills in Congress to say, look, the Congress and the Congress alone has the authority to declare war. That's the constitutional responsibility of the Congress. That should include nuclear war. So if the President of the United States wants to use a nuclear weapon first, not in response, but first, he has to come to Congress and ask authority to do it. So there's a bill sponsored by Ed Markey, Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts, and Ted Lieu from California, called the Markey-Lieu bill, that does exactly that. It's got 54 co-sponsors in the House. 13 senators have signed up to try to do this. This is another Congressman Adam Smith from Washington State. He's the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. He could become the chairman in December. He has a bill to say no first use. It's a one-sentence bill. It shall be the policy of the United States not to use a nuclear weapon first. So then the president can't do this. It wouldn't be a legal order. If we were attacked, could the president respond? Yes. But you can't do it first. So people are debating this. People are pushing this. Are any of these bills going to pass now? No. Not in this Congress. Not in this Congress. But they're preparing, and this is what a lot of people are doing, preparing for what the policy should be when the political calculations change and a moment opens up where we can correct some of the flaws in our own policy that the current presidency has exposed.
I have a couple more questions, and then we'll open up to the audience. So you guys can start using the app to submit questions, and we're also going to be passing around note cards and pencils for those of you who aren't using the app. Right, and if you're a student, notify on the card that you write student, so we'll prioritize your questions.
I'll try to keep my answers shorter. Okay.
That's okay. I was discussing with you before the panel about your support for the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and we spoke about how you were initially against it and that you came around and now you're supporting it. So can you?
I'm doing a panel later today with Susie Schneider, who's one of the leaders of a group called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And this is the citizens group that did this treaty to ban nuclear weapons. I had a conversation with the former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry about this. He teaches a class at Stanford University, and he went around. He was interviewing me as part of his class, and he asked me what I thought about this, and he felt the same way. At first, I was against this treaty. The treaty negotiations didn't involve any of the nuclear weapon states, so none of the countries with nuclear weapons were part of this process. That's different from other treaties. The treaty to ban biological weapons, it was started by us. Richard Nixon started it when we had the biggest, best biological weapons arsenal in the world, enough viruses and toxin to kill every man, woman, and child on Earth. And we decided we didn't want them anymore, and he started the negotiation. The chemical weapons treaty that banned chemical weapons started by H.W. Bush. I used to be in Congress on the staff when we were debating to build a new more deadly chemical weapon called the Big Eye Bomb. Two substances would combine in flight to make a deadly nerve gas that would kill people with one drop on contact. The Army said we had to have it. We had to be able to answer the Warsaw Pact capabilities in kind, or else soldiers would die. Ronald Reagan was pushing it. The Democrats in Congress, I was working for them, were against it, unresolved, deadlocked in Congress. In 1991, H.W. Bush said nobody should have chemical weapons, and he started the negotiations that led to that treaty. So we have gotten rid of our chemical weapons. These are no longer in any major state's arsenals. These are weapons that are taboo. I mean, you see what happened in Syria. About 50 people killed, but probably a crude chlorine bomb. And the world is outraged, and we're probably going to strike Syria. Over 50 deaths by a chemical agent. Why is that? Why is that so horrific? 15 people were killed in Yemen yesterday from a Saudi bombing run. You don't see people talking about striking Saudi Arabia. It's the horror of these kinds of weapons that this is, and these had been accepted. These had been accepted by, if you were a major state, you had to have these kinds of weapons. No, not anymore. They are taboo, they are horrific. The deal that Obama got with Syria took 1,000 tons of Syrian chemical weapons out of their arsenal. As bad as the situation is in Syria, it would have been so much worse if they still had those deadly nerve gases. And there was only a couple of chemical weapon stockpiles left in the world. But the reason that treaty worked is because the countries with the chemical weapons were willing to give them up. And that's the problem with the ban treaty. The countries with the nuclear weapons are not part of it. So I was against it. But I changed my mind as I saw the success of this, country after country coming out to endorse it. It wasn't just some peace groups demonstrating in San Francisco or Stockholm. No, these were countries signing up to it and coming up and feeling very strongly about it. And there was nothing else going on in the world. There were no negotiations going on right now for the reduction of nuclear weapons. The last negotiations were with U.S. and Russia back in 2010. The last treaty we had was the New START Treaty in 2010. Nothing is going on. This process of steadily going down has stopped. Nobody is reducing anymore. We're at this inflection point where they're starting to go up. So it was that made me feel like, look, there's some problems with this treaty. It's a huge mountain to climb, but it is so much better than doing nothing. And you have all this support behind it. And when I was in Oslo and I heard the speech from the head of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, I mean, she was impassioned about this, impassioned about the hope that this treaty could be a spur to restart reduction talks. Maybe the nuclear weapon states don't join this treaty. Maybe they don't agree to give up their bomb. But at least maybe they feel the pressure will build so they feel that we have to stop this new arms race before it becomes unstoppable, that we can get back down on the path of reductions. And that more and more people can see the horrors of nuclear weapons the same way we see the horrors of chemical weapons. You think that's bad? You think 50 men, women, and children dying from chlorine gas asphyxiation is bad? Think about what a nuclear weapon does. And it won't be 50. It'll be 50,000, 150,000, dying in the most horrible ways possible. But we accept this. We say, no, we need to do this for our security. We need to have the ability to conduct mass murder to keep us safe. Really? Really? And so that's why I come around to being a supporter of the treaty, and I'm hopeful about its prospects. And if you want to hear more, come to the panel with Susie Snyder, who's even more passionate about this than I am. Thank you.
We have a student question coming in through the app, and the student's asking, is there not a strategic advantage to first-use preemptive strikes against certain adversaries? When both adversaries have a first strike advantage, doesn't crisis stability increase?
Yeah. So this is the wonderful world of nuclear theory, where you sketch all this out. And there's a certain logic to this. And this is called mutually assured destruction, that if you know that the other side can take you out, you have to build up a system so that they can't take you out. So you have enough weapons, enough protected weapons, so if the adversary fires first, I think that's what the student is asking, you will survive this. this is an extremely tenuous situation. I mean, you have to, when you start to think about, so this is the balance we have right now. People have called it the balance of terror. So tell me the question again. You lost it. Go.
No, I have
You got it.
Is there not a strategic advantage to first use preemptive strikes against certain adversaries? Right. And does crisis stability increase?
And so I would say no. So this is what we're going for right now. You have to understand these theories are alive in our country and other countries. And we are going for the ability to have a first strike against Russia or China or North Korea. And this is a live debate that we could knock them out first, or we could get all of their nuclear weapons in a first strike. And they would not be able to retaliate. And if they do try to retaliate, we'll have a missile shield that can shoot them down. That's the plan. In a couple of weeks, there's going to be a new nuclear with a missile defense review that's going to call for an expansion of this missile defense system. The 44 interceptors that don't work very well, they want to build maybe 3-4 times as many up there, and they want to go back to putting weapons in space, and they're going to be talking about lasers that can shoot these down. It's all part of this idea that you could have a first strike. If you're on the other side of that, you want to have robust forces that can survive that first strike and put enough uncertainty in your adversary's thinking so that they won't dare do that. But North Korea really illustrates it. John Bolton, the new national security advisor, says we should bomb North Korea, says we should go first. Not because North Korea is about to attack us, they're not. Not because they're massing for an attack, they're not. No, we should bomb them now because we can. And we don't want to wait so their capabilities build up and it becomes more difficult. We should bomb them now. So that's his view. He's written about this. I'm not disclosing a secret. And this is an extremely dangerous idea because I think it's nuts to think that you can get all the other guys' weapons. The history of air warfare shows that you can't do that, that the targets are elusive, that your intelligence is poor, that leaders are irrational. You may think this will be such an overwhelming blow, the other side will sue for peace. That may not be what the other side thinks. They may think this is it, we're going down, we're going to do one more strike against you. So this is to me, this posture is an extremely dangerous posture. The first strike doesn't give you stability. The only way you get stability is no strike.
We have a couple questions here asking what are your 5 most dangerous threats? I know you talked about them a little bit.
What are my 5 most
dangerous
threats?
Dangerous threats.
So in order, it's the arms race, the new drive towards new, more usable nuclear weapons. So we just had a new nuclear plan. That's the title of this panel, where the Pentagon is proposing new kinds of nuclear weapons, so-called low yield. The argument is that we are deterred from using nuclear weapons because they're too big. So let's make them smaller, back to Hiroshima size or smaller, and then we'd be more likely to use them in battle, in a first strike. So this is extremely dangerous. George Shultz, former Secretary of State, and on my advisory panel at Plowshares Fund, said, once you use a nuclear weapon, it doesn't matter what size it is. A nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon, and the other side will respond back, and then you're off to the races. And that's how I feel. So that's my 4th. The 3rd threat is the possibility that the Iran deal collapses, because we collapse it. And then you unleash the Iranian program again. The 2nd threat is North Korea, and the 1st threat is our own policies, our own command and control system.
Back to number 3, can you explain the the Iran deal and Trump's position?
Can I explain the Iran deal and Trump's position? I'll do this real quick because we're going to have a whole panel about this. But Trump says it's the worst deal he's ever seen, and that he wants out. He wants out of it. There's a certain strategic logic to this. There are others who say this. They're a minority in this country who say that we should pull out of the deal. And the basic argument is we shouldn't be making any deal with this regime. They have some questions. They believe that the deal only lasts for about 15 years and then Iran could break out of it. that's not clear at all that that's what would happen. But more, it's a core belief that we shouldn't be propping up an evil regime like the mullahs in Iran. And so we should get out of this deal, and instead we should be pressuring them in every way possible to try to overthrow that regime. That's the basic argument. And Trump seems to buy into this. Nobody else who's part of this deal buys into this. So our NATO allies do not want to kill this deal. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that verifies that Iran is complying with it, says this is a good deal. Our intelligence services say it's a good deal. The former Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said we should keep the deal. The Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, says we should keep the deal. You know, the problem is that the people who have been in favor of keeping the deal are being removed from the administration. So McMaster, remember in the last 3 months, we lost what? The National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, his Chief Economic Advisor. I mean, leaves are falling off this tree. Or the way I talk about it, the control rods are being removed from the reactor. And you're put in place John Bolton, who hates the deal and wants to kill it, Mike Pompeo, a Secretary of State, if he's confirmed, it's not clear, who wants to kill the deal. So you're moving towards the probability sometime in May that is more or less around the Kim summit that the President of the United States could kill this agreement, which will have extraordinarily negative consequences on our ability to then negotiate a deal with the North Koreans. If you're the North Koreans and you've just seen the president kill this deal with Iran, you're thinking, can I trust this guy? Why should I bother making a deal at all? Can you trust the United States? And that's what's happening, is our credibility around the world is steadily being decreased. The gap that existed between the United States and our NATO allies is turning into a chasm. You know, you hear we're losing the confidence of our allies in our ability to have a sound, sensible national security and foreign policy, and to be able to stick to it, to have some degree of consistency so that people can trust our word, can make some kind of stability in the belief that we're going to actually do what we say we're going to do.
We have a couple questions from students that are commenting on John Bolton, and they're asking if his addition as the National Security Advisor makes nuclear war more likely.
Yes, it does make war more likely. You have to understand, there's a certain way, it's hard for people to think about this. There's a certain way of thinking, you see it a lot in Washington among some strategic thinkers, who say, look, yes, war is terrible. Hundreds of thousands could die, millions could die, but it's worth it because we will have some kind of strategic advantage. And this is not a crazy thought. I mean, I don't know if you saw The Darkest Hour, for example, where you saw Winston Churchill understand that he was condemning 4,000 troops to their death in order to protect the retreat from Dunkirk. And so, you know, at a certain level, you make these decisions. You decide that it's worth the death of 4,000, 40,000, 400,000. We went to war with North Korea. We killed 3 million Koreans in the Korean War. 3 million Koreans. So you have a sort of a set of thinking that I think it requires an almost pathological lack of empathy, where you don't identify with the people you're willing to sacrifice. But there's a belief with people, and it's people like John Bolton who believe that this is what is necessary. In order for us to preserve our privileged position in the world, we're going to have to go to war. We're going to have to do war. And so he wants to go to war with Iran. I mean, it's not if forced to. No. He wants to do it. He believes this is a sound strategic move. He wants to go to war with North Korea, knowing what would happen. Knowing, as Secretary Mattis says, that if we go to war with North Korea, it will be a level of violence that is not in the living memory of most Americans. We're talking World War II levels of violence. We could again see 1 million, 2 million, if it goes nuclear, tens of millions of Koreans killed in a matter of weeks. Not years, but in a matter of weeks, because of the level of destructive force we now have at our capability. And yet, he's a kind of person who's willing to do this. He has contempt for international agreements. He has contempt for international organizations. He thinks that all of these agreements and organizations that we have built up, we started the United Nations, we started NATO, we signed the Biological Treaty and the Chemical Weapons Treaty and the New START Treaty. We did all this. Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. And John Bolton thinks these are ropes that the Lilliputians are using to tie down the American Gulliver. They have to be cut. They have to be cut. So it's a completely foreign worldview from what most of us have, but that is the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States right now.
A student is asking, and you talked about this earlier, how long would the United States have to decide on a response if we detected a missile from North Korea?
To decide on a response, the flight path of a ballistic missile from Asia to the United States is about 30 minutes. We pick it up, like I say, as it breaks cloud cover, about a minute, 2 minutes in. It takes a little while to track, so by 5, 10 minutes in, the information is relayed to the command authority. So this works the other way. Then at that point, the command authority alerts the National Security Advisor or the Secretary of Defense, who then alerts the President. And so now you're about halfway through, so you're at about the 15-minute mark, and the missile's right about here. And at that point, you've already relayed the information to your missile defense batteries, and they probably fired at that point already. So you're probably trying to launch interceptors. But the U.S. response, well, this is the interesting thing. The system is set up so there would then be a conference, and the President would have about 4 to 5 minutes of discussion, and then he'd give the order, and the system is set up so once the President gives the order is executed within about 4 minutes. So it takes 4 minutes from the sign of go to turn the keys, fire. And so the response launch would hopefully take place about 25 minutes after you've heard the detection. But that's only if you decide you have to launch before the missile hits. I mean, in a global thermonuclear war, you're talking about hundreds of warheads. That's why the system was set up that way. You wanted to fire your weapons before they were destroyed. But if you're talking about 1, 2, 5, 6, 10, it doesn't matter. You could ride that out. And so in that scenario, you could have hours or days. You have the luxury of deciding when to use some of the thousands of weapons that you have available to you.
And do we know North Korea's process to launch? Does Kim have the sole authority like our president does?
That's a very interesting question. No, we don't know. Probably. But our system is fairly unique. I mean, even in Russia, we think there's a consultative process. I'm not aware of another country where one person has the authority. In other words, throughout the whole system, it takes 2 people to say yes, 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 including 2 people to turn the keys, except at the top. We have no idea. What we believe that Kim, since he has absolute control over that country, has absolute control to launch the nuclear weapons when he wants. In fact, it's easier to think about this. You think about a person who you think of as crazy, Kim Jong-un, having that ability, you think that's nuts. What a crazy system. This is the toughest part of the job, picking the last few questions.
I know. A lot of them are good.
I'll be short. Ask me.
We have till 10:40. Okay. We have a pretty depressing question here. What is the time now?
Compared to?
What is the time now on the Doomsday Clock?
Oh,
and
yeah.
How do you evaluate that?
The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is one of these very thoughtful groups that exists and was founded by atomic scientists, by the people who built the bomb at the Manhattan Project years ago. And one of them, Leo Szilard, is the man who discovered fission. He's the man who made sense of all these experiments. This is 1938, these experiments we were doing uranium. He says the only thing that would explain the results that we're seeing, the material warming up, starting to heat up, is that we were actually splitting the atom. And he understood that, and he called it fission after sort of the biological process of cells splitting into 2. And then he helped build the bomb, and afterwards regretted it and helped found the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And since the 1950s, they've had this idea of trying to visually illustrate the threat we face by having a clock. and they would move the minute hand closer to midnight or further away from midnight. The furthest it's ever been, I think, is 27, 28 minutes away, and that was near the end of the Cold War, when it really looked like, okay, shoo, we're going to get out of this alive. We're climbing down. The weapons are being dismantled. The U.S. and the Soviet Union is no more. The U.S. and Russia are friends. Well, we didn't move fast enough, and this should be a lesson. We didn't move fast enough. When you have the political moment to implement policy changes that you know make sense, you got to move. You got to move faster. You can't be as timid as we were in the 90s. But we didn't move. So we're back now to mounting threats. And just last year, the scientists voted, and they now take climate change into consideration. They look at these twin threats. You know, of all the problems we have, there are only two that threaten destruction on a global scale: climate change and nuclear weapons. Climate change can destroy humanity over the decades. Nuclear weapons can do it in an afternoon. But they both threaten this, and they both require a global response. So they've merged the two together, and both are going in the wrong direction right now. Basically because of us. Basically because of us. We're not the solution for these problems anymore. We're an obstacle. We're an impediment. We pulled out of the Paris Climate Change Accord, and we have a president of the United States who wants more nuclear weapons, not fewer. You know, one of the reasons Rex Tillerson was fired, including the president talked about his disagreement over the Iran agreement, but it was also because he called the president a moron. And he did that. I'm a consultant for MSNBC now, so I talk with a lot of the reporters there, and one of them named Carol Lee broke the story on this last October, that Trump was in a briefing at the Pentagon. And this was all on NBC website and was widely quoted. And he's getting a briefing on the nuclear posture review, on where it was and what we were doing. And the generals were showing him a graph of nuclear weapons over time, and this big climb up to this insane level of like 70,000, and then the decline down. And President Trump points to the peak of the U.S. arsenal, which is in the late 60s, and he says, I want that many. And that's why Rex Tillerson, after the meeting, called him a blanking moron. And he never denied that remark, and Trump never forgave him for it. But it's because of that mentality, when you have a president that wants an insane number of, and the generals had to explain, we don't need that many, we can't afford that many, it would take a decade or more to build back. But you have a president who wants more, who said, you know, why do we have nuclear weapons if we don't use them? That has threatened North Korea with fire and fury. You know, the title of that book comes from these threats on North Korea. And you have there's a certain element in the defense establishment that agrees with this, that is using the president's sentiment to do what they've always wanted to do, build more nuclear weapons, make them more usable, and they believe this is a tool of American power, and we should have more of these things, and they're more credible to us if people think we're going to use them. What's the, if people don't think you're going to use nuclear weapons, and they're less useful to you strategically. So we have to make people think we're going to actually use them. The only way to do that is to be prepared to actually use them. And think, whoa, 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 whoa. Really? Just because your car can go 120 miles per hour doesn't mean you should go 120 miles per hour. So the scientists have moved it to 2.5 minutes before midnight, and it's dire. I mean, it's in some ways one of the biggest risks we didn't talk about. That is not because somebody intentionally does this. One of the biggest risks people see in this area is that we stumble into nuclear use. There's a miscalculation, there's a misunderstanding, there's a machine malfunction, there's a cyber hack. And we decide to use nuclear weapons by mistake. We don't mean to, or maybe in these days of cyber warfare, we don't decide at all. Somebody else is deciding. And this is something you really have to start taking seriously as cyber warfare becomes more and more capable and harder to defend against. So for all this cluster of reasons, the scientists are more worried now than they have been. This is the closest we've been to midnight since the end of the Cold War.
We have a question that ties into cyber warfare. Someone's asking, what is the possibility and or probability that another country or terrorist group could hack into our nuclear missile system?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I had General James Cartwright, the former commander of the Strategic Command, former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, out in San Francisco. We did our annual gala for Plowshares Fund, and he was talking about this threat. This was 3 years ago. And he said, you know, this is much more prevalent than people realize. I think his quote was, either you've been hacked and you're not admitting it, or you've been hacked and you don't know it. But the tools are really very capable. Is it Heather Ruff on the panel yesterday, the one from Deep Think, from Google? She was talking about cyber weapons yesterday, killer robots, autonomous drones, artificial intelligence. And this is getting real serious, real fast. And anybody who knows anything about this knows that the nuclear command and control is not immune to cyber attack. It's completely possible that our systems could be hacked, and we are working on hacking other people's systems. And the rule of thumb, said General Cartwright, if we can do it, the other guy can do it. You know, even a country as small as North Korea can develop a very robust hacking capability, as they've demonstrated already. Remember their North Korean attack on Sony Pictures? That was just about data, but it's completely possible that you can develop tools, and we've developed them, that not just steal data or track activity, spy on you, but take over hardware, take over control. Because so much, well, our nuclear missiles are computer controlled. So if you can control the computers, you can control the missiles. So this is a very real threat. And for me, it's one of the reasons that even if you don't think we can eliminate nuclear weapons, and I do think we can, that you want to get down to very low numbers. The fewer of these weapons you have, you know, the more able you are to protect them, the more safeguards you can build in. So if we can get down, even to me, if we could get down to a few hundred in the United States, which is plenty, that's more than enough to do any conceivable military mission. Remember, we haven't used a nuclear weapon in 72 years. There hasn't been a military mission that has required us to use one nuclear weapon, let alone 4,000. So if we can just get this down to a reasonable level, then we can be more secure, but not perfectly secure, against a cyber attack, a cyber threat, somebody taking control of our weapons.
And where is North Korea gaining this knowledge on how to build these weapons and how to engage in cyber warfare?
One, they're very smart. So they know a lot. Two, they had assistance over the years from first Russia and then later China. And three, they are in a, excuse me, I got to get rid of that phone call. They've had the benefit of Russian emigres. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of out-of-work missile scientists and nuclear scientists. And we had a program, this was, both Republicans and Democrats supported this, to help find those people work in place, help them find work in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus where they were. But it wasn't big enough, and there wasn't all of them, and a whole bunch went over to North Korea to help them. The rocket engines in this ICBM, we think they probably were either directly from or designed from Ukrainian-built Soviet ballistic missiles. They look a lot like the Soviet-era ballistic missiles that were manufactured in Ukraine. And it's unclear exactly, did they buy a whole set of engines? Which, by the way, is a sort of an optimistic take. Maybe they didn't actually build those engines that they just demonstrated. Maybe they have a set of them, a dozen, 2 dozen. That's good. Maybe there's a limit to their capability and they can't serially produce hundreds the way Kim Jong-un has said. But they've clearly demonstrated the knowledge, the ability to adapt this technology and turn it into genuinely Korean-built missiles. Maybe not that ballistic missile, but real close. You know, there's a marketplace of skills and technology out there, and they bought it. They bought a whole bunch of it and brought it in and have done a very good job of adapting it for their needs.
We have several student questions. Thank you for submitting these. A student's asking, should the U.S. posture be rooted in damage limitation, massive retaliation, or military denial?
Wow. Okay. Okay, give me the three again, because this is the classic choices. Go.
Damage limitation, massive retaliation, or military denial?
Yeah. Okay. So massive retaliation is basically the strategy we have now. So it's mutually assured destruction. If you launch a massive attack on us, we're going to massively attack you back. And so then nobody will go. And that theory works. The problem with that theory is it works really well until it fails. And if there's a miscalculation or a misunderstanding or a poor decision, then you've risked, you've destroyed not just the other country, you've probably destroyed your own country as well. And what we now know about nuclear weapons is that if we launch a massive attack on another country of 100 weapons or more, that is going to induce a climate change that is going to come back on us. So people are starting to talk about about assured suicide. So not mutually assured destruction, but an assured suicide mission. Our climate models are such that we now know that you put 100 or so weapons, say India and Pakistan have a war with 100 or so weapons in the densely populated, mostly wooden structures of those South Asian cities, that would put enough smoke and particulate into the atmosphere that it would cover the Earth in a cloud for 2 or 3 years, dropping global temperatures about 2 or 3 degrees. 2 or 3 degrees, that doesn't sound so bad, except that kills off somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the food crops in the world. So you induce a famine that we calculate would kill about 1 billion people. So you do that, you can understand not just the loss of those lives, but the political turmoil, the migration, the struggle for survival that induces, and you're looking at a civilization-threatening event. You do more work with nuclear weapons, there's more climate change. So you do this kind of massive retaliation strategy, you're probably killing yourself. Damage limitation. So that's a measured response. Somebody strikes you with 10 nuclear weapons, then you try to strike back with an equivalent number. And the theory goes that you can try to control the escalatory ladder. Somebody uses 1, you use 1. Somebody responds back with 2, you use 2. The problem with that theory, which is a more sane theory, is that there really is no logical fire break. Where do you actually stop? And it depends upon the ability of the command and control system to actually control the escalation. And since one of your targets is the command and control system of the other side, you're in the ironic system of killing the very people you're counting on to not retaliate against you, to give the order not to retaliate. So it's... I don't believe there is a sound, sensible, rational nuclear military strategy. You can debate these and it works great on paper, but when you come down to the real world and you look at how wars actually work, I think all of these end up leading to unacceptable levels of destruction, including possible the destruction of human civilization.
And we know Joe can talk for hours, but unfortunately we're out of time. It's 10:40 now, so thank you all for coming out this morning.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful talking with you. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.